Okay, in the last month or so, there's been a lot of articles on this subject. Will the NHL expand into Europe? I'm not the first YouTube channel to discuss this either. If you watch Post to Post, they've discussed it as well, in a more humorous way. But I'm looking at this far more seriously. Now, the reason why I bring it up is because obviously the Seattle expansion, there's going to be 32 teams, and there's been plans that have been proposed of a 40-team league, or proposals for a 40-team league in some quarters. So let's have a look at it, shall we? You need a division of 8 teams in Europe. So we won't just look at all. It's very similar to the NFL going to Europe, basically. So it's a carry on from yesterday's video. Now, basically, the Deputy Commissioner of the NHL, Bill Daly, who is Gary Bettman's assistant, who's another spokesperson for the league, back in 2008 stated it is a possibility that the NHL could have a permanent presence in Europe in 10 to 15 years' time, which is now, because it's 2018. So 10 years later, we've had games on the road, we've had pre-season games in Europe, we've had exhibition games in Europe, and we've had regular season games in Europe, where Florida and Winnipeg this year, for example, have played, and last year it was Colorado and Ottawa, and then we've had some pre-season games in Europe. We've seen the Belfast Giants play an exhibition game against the Boston Bruins, for example. So there have been games played over here under the NHL banner, both in pre-season, exhibition, and regular season. Still no team yet. So it was stated it was a possibility in that time frame. I think that time frame, you can add that on to from here onwards, so 2028, for example, could be then. But there's a massive obstacle. There's two massive obstacles, actually. The IIHF president, René Fassel, has stated his opposition to the NHL expansion in Europe and European-wide opposition, because there's already established leagues, which we'll get onto later. Plus, the KHL has already got well-established, so they would be competing against a very well-established, reasonably well-run league with a large fan base. The KHL has reached Central Europe now, formerly the Russian Super League, and that's a big league in itself, and that's an expanding league. So you'll be competing for fan base and a variety of other things. But this is not a new idea. This is go back to the 1960s. David Molson, who used to own the Montreal Canadiens, broached the idea during the expansion 1967 era. And then Clarence Campbell, who was the NHL president at the time, also mentioned that the Stanley Cup could be played outside of North America at some point within his lifetime. Hasn't happened, but the idea was broached back in the 60s. And we did have the Soviet series, playing against the Canadians, and then playing against club teams, such as the Flyers, for example, who played the Soviet national side. So, again, there has been the NHL going and playing against European teams since the 1960s. But here's the big talking points. The logistics, very similar to the NFL logistics if they were to have a team in London, which they're aiming to by 2025, which is very similar to the time frame that the NHL wants to get a team over here, or teams, the NFL in London. The logistics side of it, time zones. That's not including travel, time zones. Also, you've got to look at the infrastructure. So we'll look at the size of arenas. There's very few cities that have ice hockey arenas that are established for ice hockey. They have arenas, but would the arena operators be happy for 9 months of the year to give up their arena space or use their arena space for ice hockey when it could be used for a variety of other uses? Logistics is one. EU employment law. EU leagues don't have a draft. The Russian league does, because that doesn't cover necessarily all of the EU, and there are some special agreements in place with those countries that have KHL teams that are within the EU. There are some special agreements in place, but even then, the KHL doesn't really have a similar draft system. It's a different system. So EU employment law would be a hurdle. The tax, would players, especially American players, be happy with the tax? European players are used to it. Canadian players are used to a high tax threshold, but would US players especially be happy with the tax? It's less of an issue in the NHL than in the NFL, but again, tax is a big talking point. Plus the TV rights and TV timings of games, because Europe is 5 to 6 to 7, sometimes 8 hours ahead of the East Coast, let alone the West Coast. How does that affect the TV timings, and how do you target that both domestically in Europe and to the North American markets? So the issues with logistics, tax, EU employment law and TV rights are very similar to the NFL in bringing a team to London. there are other established sports that have already got, you know, a big stake in the European sports market. We're talking European football or soccer to the North Americans, and rugby union and rugby league, and a whole host of other sports such as field hockey and other team sports. Motorsport is very, very popular in Europe. You know, there are other sports that are very well established. So I'm looking at football here, and rugby union especially, very well established. Got established professional, semi-professional leagues, established fan bases, established clubs. Also, the established hockey leagues. Going into the established sports, there you've got the SHL, the Elite League. You've got the French League, the DEL. There are some established, not just the KHL already in Europe. There are some very strongly established and historical national leagues that are well established, which have a good following, and again have now got TV rights being sorted out, and you risk undermining the domestic European leagues that are already creating players for the draft. Even the Elite League is now getting players drafted, so the established hockey leagues, would that undermine the development of the players through the European system? And you know, they don't have a draft system, so it's going to be, you're going to be putting an alien drafting system into Europe. Plus, you're going to be undermining the established leagues that already play and have established fan bases and trust for those fan bases and establish themselves as competitive and good quality. The Elite League is not bad quality. The SHL is really good quality. The Finnish Liga, you know. Then you've got to work out where you're going to locate your 8 teams. Because hockey as a sport in Europe is the second most practiced sport. So you're going to have a lot of locations wanting to put in bids, but there's not many cities in Europe that have NHL ready arenas. They might have multi-purpose arenas, but they may not be NHL ready. There are very few cities that have that 15,000 plus arena size, because the Winnipeg Jets have the smallest arena, but there are special circumstances with that. But there's not many arenas out there in Europe. There are some in Prague. I think there's one in Cologne. The O2 in London has hosted hockey matches before, but it's not a hockey arena. It can be converted to it, but bearing in mind that it's a multi-purpose use arena that needs to be open 24/7, 365 days a year, basically, for all the events that take place there. I'm not sure they have the logistics in place to place a hockey team there full time. The biggest arena outside of the O2 in London is in Belfast, and that's at, I think, 12 to 13,000. So that's a little on the small side for what the NHL would class as NHL standard. So there's a limited size of arenas, and then you've got to look at the infrastructure already in place and how much money it would cost to bring the arenas up to NHL standard and configuration, and how much will it cost these teams to join, because you know, where you have to find 8 teams to make a European division. Obviously, the Scandinavian teams are going to want to put their hands up, or Scandinavian cities, Germany, the UK, Czech Republic, Slovakia, but then you're ignoring places like Switzerland and Italy, which have and Austria, which have decent hockey leagues as well, and the Swiss league is very, very good. And then you have to be aware that the KHL already exists. Now, will the Russians be happy having an NHL franchise under the KHL region of influence, so to speak? They do have a Finnish team in the KHL, but would the KHL be happy with an NHL team within their league sphere of influence? So that's a big talking point. It's not a new idea, but I think it's in the long grass. I really do. Even though there's a lot of articles that are arguing in favour of the NHL expanding into Europe, and they were all written last month when Seattle was confirmed as the 32nd franchise. A lot of articles in the build-up to that announcement were in favour of an NHL expansion into Europe. A lot of the information that I'm finding seems to be that, yes, it is not a new idea. It was first mooted back in the 60s. That's 20 years before I was even born, 30 years before I was even born. And there is a possibility that when Bill Daly came out in 2008 and said, yeah, within 10 years, there's a possibility. You add on another 10 years to that, because it's now 2018, 2028, yeah, there could be. But if he was saying it then, obviously 10 years ago, there was a proposal put forward by some of the owners, and that's during ownership meetings and NHL Board of Governors meetings, to possibly look at the European market. What happened in 2008? Very, very similar to the NFL. There's been an economic and political change in things. We've had a big recession. We've had a banking crisis. If you were to ask Bill Daly and Gary Bettman now about the possibility of having an NHL team in Europe, the likelihood has gone from a possibility in 10 to 15 years to you're joking, right? Things have changed. And while they are taking regular season and pre-season games on the road to Europe and exhibition games and pre-season friendlies, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go, right, Stockholm, we'll go plonk a team there. Berlin or Cologne, we'll go plonk a team there. Bern in Switzerland or Zurich or wherever it is in Switzerland, plonk a team there. We'll have a team in Prague, we'll have a team in London or a UK city. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to start going, yeah, we'll have an 8-team NHL European League or European Division. I mean, the sticking points, logistics, EU employment, TV rights, tax, the other established sports, undermining the established hockey leagues, with the KHL be happy. The fact that the IIHF have come out and said they are against NHL expansion in Europe is a big sticking point because they are the global governors of the game. Much like FIFA are in football. If they say no, just because the NHL is the most well-known league in ice hockey and the biggest league in ice hockey, it doesn't mean they can ride roughshod over the global governing body, because NHL players do play at IIHF sanctioned tournaments, and they go, we block NHL players from playing at the World Championships permanently, which would not sit well with the players. Plus, the NHLPA, they haven't even mentioned in this video so far. I mean, the players, again, the logistics and the tax and the employment law, they will have a say. And with the rise of European players wanting to play in the NHL, if you undermine the established hockey leagues, you might undermine the quality of player development and growth of the game in those leagues. And I've argued on British hockey videos that you need to support the lower levels of the game to encourage the continued growth of the game at the level we are at in Europe. If you whack the NHL in there, that could distort the growth of the game from grassroots level in academies and youth teams up to senior level, and you could cause a big issue where that affects the fan base, the finances of these teams, and then you actually end up losing youth players rather than gaining them. So there we go. That's will the NHL expand into Europe? I think it's a distant possibility. 10 years ago, yeah, it was a possibility. Now it's a very distant possibility, because look at the date that Bill Daly came out and stated his comments. A lot has happened since then. I think you'll get a very, very different answer now if he was asked the same question. Can you see a professional hockey division or a professional NHL team in Europe? I think you're going to get a very, very different answer. And if you look at what the NBA said last year, when I mentioned the Boston Celtics time after time, but they're one of the most profitable NBA franchises, when their chief executive officer or chief operations officer, I can't remember which one it was, I think it was their CEO, was interviewed and asked the same question: would there be an NBA franchise in London or in Europe? And he said 10 years ago, so 2008, yes. Now, no. So I think if you were to ask Bill Daly or Barry Bettman or anyone in the Commissioner's office the same question now, you may get a different answer. Most likely get a different answer. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe, place your comments below, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.